The dust-laden wind howled across the Arizona territory as Lillian Parker squinted at the broken wagon wheel, tears of frustration threatening to spill from her eyes. Everything she owned lay scattered across the unforgiving trail, miles from the nearest settlement, with the blazing June sun of 1878 beating down mercilessly upon her shoulders. She had been so certain that this journey would be the answer to her prayers, but now it seemed like the final cruel joke in a lifetime of disappointments. Owen Sutherland pulled back on the reins of his chestnut stallion, slowing to a halt as he spotted the broken-down wagon on the trail ahead. His 5-year-old son James, seated in front of him on the saddle, pointed excitedly. "Pa, look. Someone's in trouble," the boy said, his eyes wide beneath the brim of his too large hat. Owen nodded, studying the scene with caution. 10 years of surviving in the Arizona territory had taught him that not everything was as it appeared. But as they drew closer, he saw only a young woman fighting desperately with a broken wheel, her honey-brown hair coming loose from its pins as she struggled. "Hello there," he called out, keeping a respectful distance. "Looks like you've had some trouble." Lillian spun around, startled by the deep voice. Her hand instinctively moved to the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. She'd heard too many stories about the dangers women face traveling alone. "Stay where you are," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Owen raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. The small boy sitting before him on the saddle stared at her with curious eyes. "Madam, I'm just offering assistance. Name's Owen Sutherland. I ranch about 10 miles north of here. This is my son, James." Lillian's gaze moved between the man and child. The boy waved shyly, and something in her posture softened. No outlaw would bring a child along on his misdeeds, surely. "Lillian Parker," she replied after a moment. "I was headed to Ash Fork when—" She gestured helplessly at the broken wheel. "I've tried everything I know, but it's beyond repair." Owen dismounted with practiced ease, lifting James down after him. Up close, Lillian could see the weathered lines around his eyes and the sun-bronzed skin of a man who lived his life outdoors. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the Eastern men she'd known, but there was something compelling in his steady gaze. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the wheel. Lillian stepped aside, watching as he knelt to examine the damage. His hands moved with confident precision, testing the broken spokes and the warped rim. "The axle's cracked too," he said finally, looking up at her. "Can't be fixed here." "Where were you headed in Ash Fork?" "I've accepted a position as the new schoolteacher," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "I was supposed to arrive 2 days ago." Owen's eyebrows rose. "You're the teacher they've been waiting on. Folks in town were starting to wonder if you'd changed your mind." "I haven't," she said firmly. "But now I don't know how I'll get there or what I'll do with my belongings." Owen straightened up, dusting his hands on his worn denim pants. "James and I can help. We've got room at our place until we can arrange to get your wagon fixed or replaced." "Ash Fork's just a half-day's ride from our ranch." "I couldn't possibly impose," Lillian began. "Pa helps everybody," James piped up, his small face earnest beneath his oversized hat. "That's what Ma used to say." Owen's expression flickered briefly with something like pain before he ruffled his son's hair. "That's right, son." He turned back to Lillian. "It's no imposition. We can load what's most important on my horse, and I'll send for the rest once we get you settled." Lillian hesitated, weighing her limited options. Night would fall soon, and she was miles from anywhere with no protection save her small derringer. This man and his son seemed genuine, and she had little choice but to trust someone. "Thank you," she said finally. "I accept your kind offer." Within an hour, they had secured her most precious possessions, clothes, books, and teaching materials to Owen's patient horse. He helped her mount, then lifted James up to sit in front of her. "I'll walk alongside," he said, taking the reins. "It's not too far." As they set off, Lillian holding the small boy securely before her, she couldn't help but wonder at the strange turn of events that had placed her fate in the hands of this quiet, strong man and his motherless child. "What happened to bring you all the way out here alone, Miss Parker?" Owen asked as they traveled, his voice careful, not wanting to pry but clearly concerned. Lillian watched the landscape pass by, considering how much to share. "I was teaching in Boston, but circumstances changed. The school board in Ash Fork responded to my inquiry, and it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start. She didn't mention the scandal that had driven her West false accusations from a spurned suitor that had tarnished her reputation. In a small eastern town, such rumors were death to a young woman's prospects, regardless of their truth. Ash Fork needs a good teacher, Owen said. The children deserve better than they've had. And what about James? She asked, glancing down at the boy who had fallen quiet, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's gait. Does he attend school in town? A shadow crossed Owen's face. He's not started formal schooling yet, been teaching him what I can at home. Caroline, my wife, she had plans for his education, but she passed 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Lillian said softly. Fever took her, Owen replied, his voice flat in the way of a man who had learned to speak of pain without revealing its depths. James was just 2. They continued in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather, the steady clop of hooves, and the occasional call of a distant bird. The landscape was unlike anything Lillian had known in Massachusetts, vast and uncompromising, with jagged mountains cutting across the horizon and vegetation that seemed sparse and alien to her eastern eyes. It's beautiful, she said, almost to herself, in a way I never expected. Owen glanced up at her, surprise evident in his expression. Most newcomers don't see it that way at first. They notice what's missing: the trees, the green fields, the neatness of eastern settlements. Perhaps, she agreed, but there's an honesty to this place. It doesn't pretend to be gentle or easy. Something like approval flickered in Owen's eyes before he returned his attention to the trail. The ranch is just beyond that ridge, he said, pointing ahead. Not much compared to what you're likely used to, but it's home. When they crested the ridge, Lillian caught her first glimpse of the Sutherland ranch. A sturdy log house stood in a small valley, smoke rising from its chimney. Nearby were a barn, corrals, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. Cattle grazed on the surrounding land, and a creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that provided a welcome splash of green in the arid landscape. It's lovely, she said, and meant it. After months of dreaming about her new life in the West, seeing this real working ranch felt like stepping into the pages of a novel. As they approached, a weather-beaten man emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. That's Hank, Owen explained. Been with me since I started the ranch. Best hand I could ask for. Hank hurried forward to help them, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Lillian. Everything all right, boss? Found Miss Parker stranded on the South Trail, Owen explained. Broken wagon wheel and axle. She's the new school teacher for Ash Fork. Understanding dawned on Hank's face. We heard they were expecting you, madam. Welcome to Sutherland Ranch. Owen helped Lillian and James down from the horse. The boy immediately ran to show Hank a feather he'd spotted along the way, leaving Owen and Lillian standing together beside the tired mount. I'll get your things inside, and then we'll see about some supper. You must be hungry after your ordeal, Owen said. I couldn't possibly ask you to cook after all you've done, Lillian protested. Please let me help with the meal, it's the least I can do. Owen hesitated, then nodded. Appreciate the offer. Truth is, James and I could use a woman's touch with the cooking. We manage, but it's nothing fancy. Inside, the house was simple but well-maintained. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a sturdy table in the center. 2 doors led to what Lillian assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean and orderly, if somewhat Spartan. You'll take my room, Owen said, carrying her trunk inside. James and I will bunk together in his. I couldn't possibly. It's no trouble, he insisted. And it's only temporary until we can get you to town. Over a simple but satisfying supper of beans, cornbread, and fried salt pork that Lillian helped prepare, they talked about Ash Fork and the surrounding territory. James, initially shy, grew animated as the meal progressed, telling Lillian about his pony, the new calf that had been born the previous week, and his collection of interesting rocks. Later, as darkness settled over the ranch and James was tucked into bed, Lillian joined Owen on the porch. The night air was cool, a welcome relief after the heat of the day, and the sky above was ablaze with more stars than she had ever seen in Boston. I hope James wasn't too overwhelming, Owen said, leaning against the porch railing. He doesn't get much chance to talk to new people, especially women. He's a delightful child, Lillian assured him. You've done well with him, especially under difficult circumstances. Owen was quiet for a moment. I try, he said finally, but a boy needs his mother. That's one regret I can't seem to shake, that James lost Caroline so young. Lillian studied his profile in the dim light spilling from the window. There was a steadiness to Owen Sutherland, a quiet strength that spoke of a man who faced life's hardships without complaint. It was an admirable quality, especially out here where the land itself seemed to test the mettle of those who chose to make it their home. Tomorrow I'll ride into town and let folks know you're safe, Owen said, changing the subject. The stagecoach comes through on Thursday. You can take that to Ash Fork if you'd prefer not to wait for your wagon to be repaired. Thank you, Lillian said. I should probably take the stage. The school board will be wondering what's become of me. Owen nodded, though something like disappointment flickered across his face so briefly that Lillian wondered if she'd imagined it. They stood in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets in the darkness. May I ask why you chose to come west, Miss Parker? Owen asked finally. It's not an easy life, especially for a woman alone. Lillian considered her answer carefully. I suppose I was seeking something new, she said, a place where I could be judged by my actions rather than by preconceptions. Owen seemed to understand the weight behind her words. The territory can be that place, he said. People here care more about what you can do than where you came from or what rumors might follow you. She looked at him sharply, wondering if he had somehow divined her secret, but his expression revealed nothing beyond simple understanding. Well, he said after a moment, straightening up from the railing, it's been a long day, best get some rest. Yes, Lillian agreed. And thank you again, Mr. Sutherland. Your kindness has been unexpected. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Owen, he corrected gently. And out here, Miss Parker, kindness isn't so much a virtue as a necessity. None of us survives alone. With those words, he bid her good night and left her to contemplate the vastness of the starry sky and the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place, this moment. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Lillian woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation in the main room. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, pinned up her hair, and joined Owen and James at the breakfast table. Good morning, she said, accepting the cup of coffee Owen offered. I hope I haven't slept too late. Not at all, Owen assured her. We're early risers by necessity. He was already dressed for the day in a clean but worn shirt, sturdy pants, and boots that had seen many miles. James looked up from his plate of flapjacks. Pa says you're going to teach me things, he said, his eyes bright with excitement. Lillian glanced questioningly at Owen, who shrugged slightly. Thought since you're here anyway, James might benefit from some proper lessons. If you're willing, that is, I'd pay you for your time, of course. There's no need for payment, Lillian said quickly. It would be my pleasure to work with James, and it will give me a chance to prepare for my classes in town. Relief crossed Owen's features. Appreciate that. I've done what I can, but my own schooling was limited. After breakfast, Owen prepared to ride to town. I should be back by mid-afternoon, he told Lillian. Hank will be around if you need anything. We'll be fine, she assured him. James has promised to show me his rock collection, and then we'll have our first lesson. Owen hesitated, then said, if you're sure. Quite sure, she replied firmly. Go on, Mr. Sutherland, we have everything well in hand. A smile touched his lips. Owen, he reminded her before mounting his horse and riding away. The day passed pleasantly. James proved to be an eager student, his quick mind absorbing everything Lillian taught him. By midday, they had covered basic arithmetic and begun working on his reading skills, which were already surprisingly advanced for a boy who had never attended formal school. Your father has taught you well, Lillian commented as James correctly sounded out a difficult word in one of the books she had brought with her. Pa reads to me every night, James explained, even when he's real tired from working all day. Lillian felt a surge of admiration for Owen, picturing him reading to his son despite the exhaustion that must come from managing a ranch single-handedly. After their lessons, James took Lillian to see the new calf he had told her about. Hank accompanied them to the barn, keeping a respectful distance but clearly under orders to ensure their safety. She's called Daisy, James said proudly as they approached the pen where a black and white calf stood on wobbly legs beside its mother. Pa says I can help raise her. She's beautiful, Lillian said, watching the boy's face light up with pleasure. Hank chuckled. Boys got away with animals, he commented, just like his pa. Have you worked for Mr. Sutherland long? Lillian asked as they watched James crouch by the pen, talking softly to the calf. Going on 8 years now, Hank replied. Was here when he brought Miss Caroline as a bride, was here when he buried her too. He gave Lillian a sidelong glance. Boss has had a hard road, madam, but he's a good man, best I've ever worked for. I can see that, Lillian said quietly, watching James. The boy's careful movements and gentle handling of the animals spoke volumes about the man who was raising him. Later, as the afternoon heat intensified, Lillian and James returned to the house. She set him to practicing his letters while she prepared a simple midday meal from the provisions in Owen's well-stocked pantry. As they ate, James asked countless questions about Boston and what it was like to live in a big city. Do you miss it? He asked, his expression serious beyond his years. Lillian considered the question. I miss certain things, she admitted, the libraries, the concerts, but I think I'll come to love the territory in a different way. James nodded solemnly. Pa says it gets in your blood living out here. Says once you've seen the sunrise over the mountains, no other place feels like home. Your father is a wise man, Lillian said, touched by the boy's words. After their meal, with the heat of the day at its peak, Lillian suggested they rest for a while. James, clearly used to the rhythm of life in the West, readily agreed. He settled on a blanket in the shade of the porch with a book, while Lillian sat nearby in a rocking chair, working on her lesson plans for the Ash Fork School. She had just finished outlining her first week's curriculum when the sound of hoofbeats announced Owen's return. He rode into the yard, accompanied by a wagon driven by a man Lillian didn't recognize. Miss Parker, Owen called as he dismounted. This is Mr. Tompkins from the livery in town. He's agreed to repair your wagon. The man tipped his hat to Lillian. Madam, Mr. Sutherland explained your situation. I'll head out to where your wagon is stranded first thing tomorrow, assess the damage, and bring back what can be salvaged. Should have you rolling again within the week. Thank you, Lillian said, relief washing over her. That's very kind. Also brought word from the school board, Owen added. They're relieved to hear you're safe and understand the delay, said to take the time you need to get settled properly. After Mr. Tompkins departed, promising to return with news of the wagon, Owen joined Lillian and James on the porch. His son immediately launched into an excited account of their day, particularly the lessons. Miss Parker says I'm smart, Pa. She says I read better than some boys twice my age. Owen's eyes crinkled with pleasure. Is that so? Well, I'm not surprised. You've always had a quick mind. He glanced at Lillian. Thank you for taking the time with him. It was my pleasure, she said sincerely. He's a wonderful student. As the evening approached, Lillian helped prepare supper, moving around the kitchen with growing confidence. Owen watched her from time to time, an unreadable expression on his face. The domesticity of the scene, James setting the table, Lillian at the stove. Himself bringing in firewood stirred something in him he'd thought long buried. After supper, with James occupied with his toys by the fireplace, Owen drew Lillian aside. I spoke with Reverend Miller in town, he said in a low voice. He's on the school board. They're still working on preparing the teachers' quarters behind the schoolhouse. It'll be at least 2 weeks before it's ready. Lillian's heart sank. I see. Is there a boarding house where I might stay in the meantime? Owen shook his head. Ash Fork's still a small settlement, no proper boarding house yet. He hesitated. The Reverend suggested you might consider staying here until your quarters are ready, said it would be appropriate given the circumstances, especially with James here. Lillian felt a flush creep up her neck. I wouldn't want to impose further, it's no imposition, Owen said quickly. The place is big enough and it would give James more time with his lessons. He paused, then added, but I understand if you're not comfortable with the arrangement. Lillian considered the offer. The prospect of spending more time at the ranch was surprisingly appealing. In just one day, she'd grown fond of young James, and the quiet strength of his father intrigued her. Moreover, the practical side of her recognized the sense in the suggestion. If you're certain it wouldn't be an inconvenience, she said at last, then I accept your kind offer. And I insist on contributing cooking, teaching James, whatever would be most helpful. Relief crossed Owen's features. That's settled then. And your contributions are more than enough, believe me. James hasn't been this animated since. He trailed off, but Lillian understood. Since his mother died, the days that followed settled into an unexpected but pleasant routine. Each morning, Lillian would rise early to help with breakfast before Owen headed out to work the ranch. Then she and James would devote several hours to his lessons. The boy thrived under her attention, his natural intelligence blossoming with structured guidance. In the afternoons, while James rested during the worst of the heat, Lillian would prepare for her eventual teaching position in town or help with household tasks. She discovered an unexpected satisfaction in the rhythms of ranch life, the necessity of each chore, the immediate results of her efforts, the simple pleasure of a meal prepared from ingredients she had helped to gather. On the fourth day of her stay, Mr. Tompkins returned with the news that her wagon was beyond repair. Axles completely split, madam, and most of the wheel spokes are shattered. Frames warped too, wouldn't be worth fixing even if I could. Lillian's face fell. The wagon had represented most of her savings, carefully accumulated during her years of teaching in Boston. I see, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Thank you for assessing it, Mr. Tompkins. I did salvage your belongings, he added quickly. Everything that wasn't damaged by the elements. Got it all loaded on my wagon outside. After Mr. Tompkins left, Owen found Lillian sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the landscape, her expression troubled. Everything all right? He asked, settling beside her. Just wondering how I'll manage without a wagon, she admitted. It was expensive to purchase, and now, she shook her head. I'll need to find another way to transport my things to town when the time comes. Owen was quiet for a moment. There's a spring wagon I've been meaning to fix up, he said finally. It's smaller than what you had, but sound. Could be yours for the cost of the materials to repair it if you're interested. Lillian turned to him, surprised by the offer. That's very generous, but it's not charity, Owen said firmly. It's a fair exchange. That wagon's been sitting unused for too long and you need transportation. Simple as that. She studied his face, seeing nothing but sincerity in his expression. Thank you, she said at last. I accept. That weekend, Owen surprised her by announcing they would all travel to Ash Fork for the Sunday service. Thought you might like to meet some of the townspeople before you start teaching, he explained, and it's been too long since James and I attended. The journey to town took just over 2 hours in Owen's sturdy wagon. James chattered excitedly the entire way, pointing out landmarks and telling Lillian stories about previous trips to town. Lillian found herself increasingly charmed by the boy's enthusiasm and his father's patient responses. Ash Fork proved to be larger than Lillian had expected, though still modest by Eastern standards. A main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, saloon, small hotel, and various businesses formed the heart of the settlement. The white painted church stood at one end of the street, its simple steeple reaching toward the clear blue sky. As they pulled up to the church, several people turned to look. Whispers followed them as Owen helped Lillian down from the wagon, his hand strong and steady around her waist. That's the new schoolteacher, Lillian heard someone say. Staying out at Sutherland's place, I heard. Been there nearly a week already. Owen's expression remained impassive, but Lillian noticed the tightening of his jaw. She lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed by the gossip. Let them talk. She had done nothing wrong, and neither had Owen. Reverend Miller greeted them warmly at the church door. Miss Parker, so good to finally meet you in person. And Owen, James, it's been too long since we've seen you here. The service was simple but heartfelt. Afterward, Reverend Miller introduced Lillian to various members of the congregation, including several parents of her future students. Most were polite, if somewhat reserved, clearly taking her measure. This is Mrs. Hampton, the Reverend said, introducing Lillian to a stern-faced woman in her 50s. She's the head of our school board. Miss Parker, Mrs. Hampton said coolly, we were beginning to wonder if you had changed your mind about the position. Not at all, Lillian replied evenly. I'm quite eager to begin. I understand the teachers' quarters are still being prepared. Yes, there have been some delays, Mrs. Hampton admitted, but we hope to have everything ready within the next 2 weeks. Her gaze flickered to Owen, who stood a short distance away, talking with some of the men. "In the meantime, I hear you've found accommodation." Lillian refused to be baited. "Yes, Mr. Sutherland has been kind enough to offer hospitality after my wagon was damaged. His son is a delightful child and a promising student." Something in Mrs. Hampton's expression shifted slightly. "James Sutherland is indeed a bright boy. His mother was a dear friend of mine before her passing." She studied Lillian for a moment longer. "I look forward to seeing your teaching methods, Miss Parker. We have high expectations for our school." After the social hour following the service, Owen suggested they visit the schoolhouse before returning to the ranch. "Might be good for you to see where you'll be working," he said as they walked down the town's dusty main street. The schoolhouse was a simple but sturdy wooden building on the edge of town. Large windows allowed plenty of light inside, where rows of benches faced a teacher's desk on a small raised platform. A blackboard covered most of one wall. "It's perfect," Lillian said, running her hand along the smooth surface of the desk. She could already picture the room filled with children, could almost hear the recitation of lessons and the scratch of chalk on slate. Behind the schoolhouse stood a small cabin in the process of being renovated. "Your quarters," Owen explained. "Looks like they're making progress." Lillian peered through the windows to see a simple but comfortable living space taking shape: a main room with a small stove, a bedroom, and what appeared to be a tiny study. It would be cozy but more than adequate for her needs. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "I'll be quite comfortable here." Owen nodded, his expression unreadable. "Town's growing. Might seem small to you now, but there's talk of the railroad coming through within a year or two. Things will change then." As they prepared to leave, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. A group of men had spilled out onto the boardwalk, their voices raised in anger. "Stay here with James," Owen instructed Lillian, moving swiftly toward the disturbance. Lillian watched anxiously as Owen approached the group. A burly man was holding another by the collar, fist raised threateningly. Owen spoke calmly to the aggressor, his posture non-threatening but firm. After a tense moment, the larger man released his grip, spitting onto the ground before stalking back into the saloon. The crowd began to disperse as Owen spoke briefly to the man who had been threatened. "What happened?" Lillian asked when Owen returned to them. "Just a disagreement over a card game," Owen said, his tone dismissive, though Lillian noticed the tension in his shoulders. "Common enough, nothing to worry about." The ride back to the ranch was quieter than their journey into town. James fell asleep shortly after they left Ash Fork, worn out from the excitement of the day. "Thank you for taking me to town," Lillian said as the wagon rolled steadily homeward. "It was good to meet everyone before classes begin." Owen nodded. "Seems they took to you well enough." "That's important in a small community." Lillian hesitated, then said, "I couldn't help noticing some whispers when we arrived." Owen's hands tightened briefly on the reins. "Small towns run on gossip," he said after a moment. "People will talk about anything different or new." "It doesn't mean anything." "I wouldn't want to damage your reputation," Lillian said carefully, "or my own." Owen glanced at her, his expression softening. "Your reputation is safe, Miss Parker. Anyone who matters knows you're staying at my ranch out of necessity, not anything improper." The way he said it made Lillian wonder suddenly if he had ever considered anything improper in relation to her. The thought brought an unexpected warmth to her cheeks, which she attributed to the late afternoon sun. Over the next few days, Lillian found herself growing increasingly comfortable at the Sutherland Ranch. Her days with James were rewarding, her evenings spent in pleasant conversation with Owen after the boy went to bed. She learned about the challenges of ranching in the territory, the vagaries of weather and cattle prices, the conflicts with larger outfits trying to control water rights. In return, she shared stories of her life in Boston, carefully editing out the painful circumstances of her departure. She spoke instead of her love for teaching, her belief in education as a path to a better future, and her favorite books and authors. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Owen asked a question that caught her off guard. "Why did you really leave Boston, Lillian?" She started slightly at his use of her first name, then sighed, knowing the time for half-truths had passed. "I was accused of impropriety with a married man," she said finally. It wasn't true. He was a school board member who became interested in me. When I rejected his advances, he spread rumors that I had been the one to pursue him. Owen's expression darkened, and people believed him. He was respected, wealthy, well-connected, Lillian said bitterly. I was just a teacher, a woman without family connections to protect me. It didn't matter that there was no truth to his claims. The damage was done. So you came west, Lillian nodded. A new start where no one knew me or the lies told about me. Owen was quiet for a long moment. Thank you for trusting me with the truth, he said finally. You've earned my trust, she replied simply. Their eyes met in the fading light, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both known pain and sought to rebuild their lives in this unforgiving but beautiful land. The next morning, Mr. Tompkins arrived with the news that the teachers' quarters in town would be ready within the week. Lillian received the information with mixed emotions. She was eager to begin her official duties as Ash Fork's teacher, but the prospect of leaving the ranch, leaving Owen and James, filled her with an unexpected sense of loss. That's good news, she said, forcing a smile. I'm looking forward to meeting all my students. Owen nodded, his expression carefully neutral. I'll have that spring wagon ready for you by then. James and I will help you move your things to town. The days that followed took on a bittersweet quality. Lillian threw herself into James's lessons, determined to give him as much knowledge as possible before she left. The boy, sensing the impending change, became more clingy, asking repeatedly if she would still teach him once she moved to town. Of course I will, Lillian assured him. You can come to the schoolhouse with the other children. But it won't be the same, James said, his lower lip trembling slightly. You won't be here in the mornings. You won't help Pa make breakfast or listen to him read to me at night. Lillian's heart ached at the boy's words. No, she admitted, but I'll still be part of your life, James. That won't change. The day before Lillian was scheduled to move to town, Owen took her to see the spring wagon he had repaired for her. The small vehicle had been meticulously restored, its wooden sides polished to a soft glow, its wheels strong and true. It's beautiful, Lillian said, running her hand along the smooth wooden seat. I can't believe you did all this work for me. Wasn't just for you, Owen said with a slight smile. Gave me a good excuse to fix something that needed fixing. He paused, then added more seriously, besides, you've done more for James in these 2 weeks than I could have hoped for. This seems a small thing in return. That evening, as they sat at the supper table, a heavy silence hung over the small family group. James pushed his food around on his plate, his usual appetite gone. James, Owen said gently, Miss Parker will still be teaching you in town. You'll see her every day at school. But she won't be here, the boy insisted, his voice small. It won't be home without her. Lillian felt tears prick at her eyes. In such a short time, this child had worked his way into her heart, as had his quiet, steadfast father. The thought of leaving them both behind in this house that had begun to feel like home was more painful than she had anticipated. After James was finally persuaded to go to bed, with the promise that Lillian would read him an extra long story, Owen and Lillian found themselves alone in the main room. The lamplight cast a warm glow over the simple furnishings, highlighting the changes Lillian had made during her stay: curtains fashioned from spare fabric, wildflowers in a jar on the table, books arranged neatly on a previously empty shelf. The place will seem different without you here, Owen said at last, breaking the silence. I've grown fond of it, Lillian admitted, of the ranch, of James. She hesitated, then added softly, of you. Owen looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes searching her face. Lillian, he began, his voice rougher than usual. I know you've only been here a short while and you have your career, your plans. Yes, she prompted when he fell silent. I'm not good with words, he said, frustration evident in his tone. Never have been. But these past weeks, having you here, seeing the way James lights up around you, the way you've made this place feel like what I always hoped it could be. He took a deep breath. I'm asking if you might consider staying, not as our guest, but as what, Owen? Lillian asked, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. As my wife, he said finally, the words rushing out. I know it's sudden and you barely know me, but I think we could build something good together, for James, for ourselves. Lillian stared at him, speechless. Of all the things she had expected, this was not one of them. And yet, as the initial shock faded, she realized that the idea didn't seem as outlandish as it should. In these weeks at the ranch, she had come to admire Owen deeply, his integrity, his devotion to his son, the quiet strength with which he faced the challenges of his life. "I don't expect an answer now," Owen added quickly when she remained silent. "It's a lot to consider. And if you say no, I'll understand completely. Nothing will change about my helping you get settled in town or welcoming James to continue his education with you." Lillian found her voice at last. "Owen, I'm overwhelmed," she said honestly. "When I came west, marriage was the furthest thing from my mind. After what happened in Boston, I was determined to establish myself independently to prove I could succeed on my own terms." Owen nodded, disappointment evident in his eyes though he tried to hide it. "I understand. It was presumptuous of me to ask." "No," Lillian said quickly. "It wasn't presumptuous, it was unexpected but not unwelcome." She took a deep breath. "I need time to think to be sure that whatever decision I make is the right one for all of us." Hope flickered across Owen's face. "Take all the time you need. My feelings won't change." The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect day for beginning a new chapter in Lillian's life. Her trunk and belongings were loaded into the spring wagon, and after a tearful farewell from James, who had to be repeatedly assured that he would see her at school the very next day, they set off for town. The journey passed mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the teachers' quarters behind the schoolhouse, Reverend Miller was waiting to greet them. "Miss Parker, welcome to your new home," he said cheerfully. "I think you'll find everything in order, but please let me know if there's anything else you need." The small cabin had been prepared with care. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a vase of wildflowers stood on the table, and the bed was made up with clean linens. It was simple but comfortable, exactly what Lillian had expected. "It's lovely," she told the Reverend. "Thank you for all your efforts." Owen helped carry her trunk and other belongings inside, setting them down carefully in the main room. His movements were measured, his expression guarded. "Well," he said when everything was arranged to Lillian's satisfaction, "I suppose that's everything." Reverend Miller, sensing the tension between them, made a discreet excuse about checking on preparations for the next day's school opening and left them alone. "Owen," Lillian began, not quite meeting his eyes. "About what you asked last night, you don't need to give me an answer now," he interrupted. "I meant what I said about taking all the time you need." "I know," she said, "but I've been thinking about nothing else since you asked, and I realize." She paused, gathering her courage. "I realize that what I came west seeking wasn't just a new start professionally. I was looking for a place where I could belong, where I could build a life that had meaning beyond just my work." Owen watched her intently, hardly daring to breathe. "These past weeks at your ranch with you and James, I've felt more at home than I ever did in Boston," Lillian continued. "I care deeply for James, and she finally met his gaze directly. "I care deeply for you too, Owen, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Hope kindled in his eyes. "Are you saying, I'm saying I need a little more time," Lillian clarified. "Not to decide if I care for you, because I do, but to be sure that I'm ready for the responsibilities of being a wife and mother. James deserves nothing less than my complete commitment." Owen nodded, understanding in his expression. "That's fair," he said, "and wise." He hesitated, then asked, "May I call on you here in town?" A smile curved Lillian's lips. "I would like that very much." The following weeks established a new routine. Lillian threw herself into her teaching duties with enthusiasm, quickly winning over even the most skeptical of Ash Forks residents with her dedication and skill. Her students, including James, thrived under her guidance. True to his word, Owen called on her regularly. Sometimes he would bring James for an evening meal at her small cabin. Other times he would come alone, after the boy was settled at the ranch with Hank keeping watch. Their conversations deepened as they shared more of themselves' hopes, fears, dreams for the future. On Sundays, they would attend church together, presenting a picture of respectability that gradually silenced the worst of the town gossip. Mrs. Hampton, initially so cool, warmed to Lillian as she saw the improvements in the school and heard her own grandchildren speak enthusiastically about their new teacher. One crisp October evening, nearly 2 months after Lillian had moved to town, Owen arrived at her cabin without James. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening," he said when she opened the door. "Not at all," Lillian assured him, welcoming him inside. "I was just grading some arithmetic exercises, nothing that can't wait." They sat together at her small table, where Lillian poured coffee for them both. The autumn evenings had grown cooler, and a fire crackled cheerfully in the small stove. "I brought you something," Owen said, pushing the package across the table to her. Lillian unwrapped it curiously to find a book of poetry, Tennyson's collected works, bound in soft leather. "Owen," she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "This is beautiful, but how? These aren't easy to find out here." "Ordered it special from back east," he admitted. "Remembered you mentioning Tennyson was your favorite when we were discussing poetry one evening." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Lillian opened the book to find an inscription on the flyleaf. "To Lillian, whose strength and grace have brought light back into our lives, with deepest affection, Owen." "Thank you," she said softly, meeting his gaze across the table. "This means more to me than I can express." Owen reached across the table to take her hand in his. "Lillian," he said, his voice steady though his eyes revealed his nervousness. "It's been 2 months since I asked you to consider becoming my wife. I promised to give you time, and I've tried to honor that promise, but I find myself hoping each day that you might be closer to an answer." Lillian squeezed his hand gently. The weeks in Ash Fork had been fulfilling professionally, but her evenings were often lonely. She missed the warmth and laughter of the ranch house, missed seeing James's sleepy face at breakfast, missed the quiet companionship of sitting with Owen on the porch as the sun set. "I've been thinking a great deal about your proposal," she said. "About what it would mean for my life, for my career, for my future." Owen waited, his expression carefully neutral, though she could feel the tension in his hand. "When I came west," Lillian continued, "I was determined to stand on my own, to prove to myself and others that I didn't need anyone else to build a worthwhile life. And I think I've done that. The school is thriving, the community has accepted me, I've created a place for myself here." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But what I've also discovered is that independence isn't the same as isolation, that there's no weakness in sharing your life with someone who respects your strengths and supports your dreams." Hope flickered in Owen's eyes. "And have you found such a person?" He asked softly. Lillian smiled. "I believe I have," she said. "A man of integrity and kindness, a devoted father, someone who sees me as I truly am and values what I bring to his life." She took a deep breath. "Yes, Owen, my answer is yes, I would be honored to become your wife." The joy that transformed Owen's face made Lillian's heart swell. He rose from his chair, coming around the table to kneel beside her. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory," he said, raising her hand to his lips. "I promise to do everything in my power to ensure you never regret your decision." Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in the Ash Fork Church, with Reverend Miller officiating. The entire community turned out for the occasion, the women bringing dishes for the celebration afterward, the men having helped Owen add an extension to the ranch house to accommodate the growing family. James served proudly as ring bearer, his face nearly splitting with the width of his smile as he watched his father and his beloved teacher exchange vows. Even Mrs. Hampton dabbed at her eyes during the ceremony, later telling Lillian that Caroline would have approved of Owen's choice. The school board agreed that Lillian could continue teaching, at least until a replacement could be found, with the understanding that she would commute from the ranch each day in her spring wagon. It was an unusual arrangement for the time, but the quality of Lillian's teaching had made her valuable enough that exceptions could be made. Life at the Sutherland ranch took on a new rhythm with Lillian's permanent presence. Mornings began with family breakfast before Owen headed out to work the cattle and Lillian drove James to town for school. Evenings were spent together around the table or the fireplace, sharing the events of the day, reading aloud from favorite books, or simply enjoying each other's company. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that blanketed the landscape in pristine white. On Christmas Eve, with a fire roaring in the hearth and evergreen boughs decorating the main room, Lillian presented Owen and James with hand-knitted scarves in rich brown wool. "To keep you warm on the range," she explained as they admired her handiwork. James immediately wrapped his around his neck despite the warmth of the house. "It's perfect, thank you, Ma," he exclaimed, the term of endearment slipping out naturally, though he had been calling her Lillian since the wedding. Lillian felt tears prick at her eyes as she bent to hug the boy. "You're welcome, sweetheart," she whispered. Later, after James had finally been persuaded to go to bed, with assurances that Santa Claus would indeed find the ranch despite its remote location, Owen presented Lillian with a small box wrapped in silver paper. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Sutherland," he said, his eyes warm with affection. Inside, Lillian found a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she discovered a tiny photograph of James on one side and Owen on the other. "So you'll always have us close to your heart," Owen explained, helping her fasten it around her neck. "It's beautiful," Lillian said, touching the locket gently. "But I already have you both in my heart, every moment of every day." Owen drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that still had the power to make her knees weak after 3 months of marriage. "And we always will be," he promised. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pastures, wildflowers carpeting the hills, and the news that Lillian was expecting a child of her own. "Are you sure?" Owen asked, his voice filled with wonder when she told him one evening after James was asleep. Lillian nodded, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday. We should welcome our new addition in late October." Owen gathered her in his arms, his joy palpable. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." James was equally thrilled when they shared the news with him the next morning. "I'm going to be a big brother," he announced to everyone at church that Sunday, unable to contain his excitement. The pregnancy meant changes for their family. Lillian reluctantly resigned from her teaching position, effective at the end of the school year in May. The school board accepted her decision with understanding, immediately beginning the search for a replacement while assuring Lillian that she would always be welcome to return if circumstances permitted. Summer passed in a haze of preparation. Owen and Hank converted part of the main room into a nursery area, building a cradle from cottonwood and a rocking chair that became Lillian's favorite spot in the house. She sewed tiny garments in the evenings, often with James at her side learning simple stitches that he insisted would be useful for a big brother to know. As her body changed with the growing child, Lillian found herself reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. The broken wagon that had seemed like a disaster had in fact been the beginning of her true happiness. Had she continued to Ash Fork as planned, would she and Owen have found each other? Would James have become the son of her heart? "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked one evening, finding her standing on the porch, her hands resting on her swollen belly as she gazed out at the sunset-painted landscape. "About how grateful I am for a broken wagon wheel," Lillian replied with a small smile, "and for the cowboy who stopped to help." Owen chuckled, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her and their unborn child. "Best thing that ever broke down on my land," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Our journey together started there," Lillian mused, "and look how far we've come." October brought cool weather and, right on schedule, the arrival of their daughter. After a long but uncomplicated labor with the local midwife in attendance, Lillian gave birth to a healthy baby girl with Owen's dark hair and her own blue eyes. "She's perfect," Owen whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with the same gentle hands that could break a wild horse or mend a fence. Tears glistened in his eyes as he gazed down at his daughter's face, just like her mother. They named her Caroline Elizabeth Sutherland, honoring both Owen's first wife and Lillian's mother. James was enthralled with his baby sister, spending hours just watching her sleep or delighting in her tiny fingers wrapped around his own. Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby's arrival. The days were fuller, the nights sometimes shorter, but Lillian found deep contentment in motherhood. Having James and little Caroline Carrie, as they came to call her, filled a place in her heart she hadn't known was empty. As Carrie grew from infant to toddler, Lillian began teaching again, not in the Ash Fork school, but in her own home. Word spread among the outlying ranches that the former schoolteacher was offering lessons, and soon children would arrive at the Sutherland Ranch 2 days a week for instruction. James, now 9, had progressed far beyond his age group and was Lillian's proud assistant, helping younger children with their letters and numbers. He had his father's natural leadership abilities combined with Lillian's passion for learning, a formidable combination that made her heart swell with pride. Owen expanded the ranch operations, adding more cattle and hiring additional hands to help manage the growing herd. The railroad had indeed come to Ash Fork, bringing new opportunities for shipping cattle and increasing the value of their beef. The Sutherland Ranch prospered under his careful management, allowing them to make improvements to the house and property. On the 5th anniversary of the day, Owen had found Lillian stranded with her broken wagon. They hosted a gathering at the ranch for friends and neighbors. Tables were set up in the yard under cottonwood trees strung with lanterns, and the celebration lasted well into the evening. As the guests began to depart, Lillian found Owen standing apart from the others, gazing out at the land that had been his home for so many years. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Happy anniversary," she said softly. He turned to her with a smile that still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. "5 years since a broken wagon wheel brought you into our lives," he mused. "Best day of my life finding you on that trail." Lillian leaned against him, watching as James helped 3-year-old Carrie chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Mine too," she agreed. "Though I certainly didn't think so at the time," Owen chuckled. "You were so determined to handle everything yourself. Wouldn't even let me approach until I mentioned James." "A woman alone had to be cautious," Lillian reminded him, "even one with a derringer hidden in her skirts." Owen's eyebrows rose. "You never told me about that." "A lady has to maintain some mystery," Lillian teased, her eyes dancing with mirth. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. "About the path your life has taken?" Lillian considered the question, though she already knew her answer. The young woman who had left Boston seeking independence and a fresh start had found something far more valuable: a true partnership, a family, a place where she was respected for her mind and loved for her heart. "Not a single one," she said with complete honesty. "Every step of the journey has led me exactly where I was meant to be." As the last of the guests rode away and James carried a sleepy Carrie into the house, Owen and Lillian remained outside for a few moments longer. The stars were emerging in the vast Arizona sky, countless pinpoints of light in the deepening darkness. "Remember that first night you stayed here?" Owen asked. "When you stood on this porch and looked up at these same stars?" Lillian nodded, smiling at the memory. "I'd never seen so many stars in my life. Boston's lights obscured most of them." "You said then that the territory had an honesty to it," Owen recalled, "that it didn't pretend to be gentle or easy." "I still believe that," Lillian said. "But I've learned that it's also capable of great beauty and unexpected kindness." She turned to face him fully, like the man who stopped to help a stranded schoolteacher with a broken wagon. Owen's eyes reflected the starlight as he gazed down at her. "I thank God every day for that broken wheel," he said softly, "and for the journey it started." Their lips met in a kiss filled with the warmth of shared years and the promise of many more to come. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with lamplight, a beacon of home and family in the vast Arizona night. And above, the stars continued their eternal watch over the land where a cowboy and a schoolteacher had found love in the unlikeliest of circumstances, proving once again that sometimes the most wonderful journeys begin with a broken wheel on a dusty western trail.